The HDR Envelope window displays a visual of the current HDR mix to give us a live insight into the system. The system loudness is displayed as a white line and the max momentary loudness as a yellow line. The momentary loudness of all playing HDR sounds are displayed as separate coloured lines for each sound, and these correlate to the ones shown in the HDR Activity Window. To focus on a particular sound, you can select it in the Activity Window, for example the Area Island 02, and it's highlighted in the Envelope Window. If I just pause the game, you can also use Control to select multiple sounds, and again they are highlighted in the Envelope Window. And you can use text filters in the HDR Activity Window. So for example, I'll search for the term wildlife, and this determines what's seen in the Envelope Window. If we filter this by the tank sound to just focus on that envelope within the Envelope Window, we're reminded that these envelopes show us the inputs to the HDR system, in the sense that the loudest current sound is being used to define the max momentary loudness. As we can see here with the tank, which is currently the loudest sound, shown in blue, and we can see how the max momentary loudness is tracking its momentary loudness. The HDR Mixer Window provides a mixing desk interface for editing the loudness, post-gain and HDR mode for loudness definitions and individual sounds. Tracks are organised according to the HDR hierarchy, with loudness definitions and sounds nested underneath their parents. So here I'll expand the ambience loudness definition using the drop down menu, and you can see the wildlife loudness definition beneath that. If I then expand this loudness definition, you can see the individual sounds that are assigned to it. If a sound has HDR enabled but is not nested within a loudness definition, it will appear under Other. As you can see, depending on your organizational discipline, this may include many sounds, since it includes all the sounds within the project directories that you set up in your project settings. So, like in the HDR Activity Window, there's a search bar within the HDR Mixer that you can use to filter the tracks that are displayed. Clicking on the star icon adds it to your favorites, and then you can use the favorites icon here to filter by favorites. Each track comes with a momentary loudness meter on the left, where any levels above the resting loudness are shown in white, and on the right of each track a peak meter shows the signal after adjustments by the HDR system and post gain. The central loudness fader sets the loudness for either the loudness definition or a sound if it does not belong to a loudness definition itself. For any children of loudness definitions, including other loudness definitions themselves, these act as offsets. So for example here with the quad loudness definition, it's an offset of -20 from its parent, which is 80, therefore it has a loudness of 60. When auditioning or mixing in HDR, it can be useful to hear single sounds or parts of a loudness hierarchy in isolation to assess the impact they're having on the mix or how they are affected by the mix. A separate mute solo system for the HDR sounds is provided in the mixer, since the inbuilt engine mute solo system operates early in the signal chain and affects the HDR mix. These mute solo options only affect what you hear, and so you can hear the outcomes of the HDR process. So if we focus in on the wildlife, we can solo that and pull up a weapon, hear the impact of that weapon sound on the wildlife. So there you can hear it ducking out and then coming back in. Also note that mute and solo persist when exiting and restarting the game. And if you do lose track, then you can always use the console command SweejTech HDR clear mutes and solos. The HDR Controls Window allows sound designers to control the system's ballistic settings, auditioning them and optionally saving the values into the project settings. It also allows the bypassing or disabling of various features of the HDR system. To A/B compare your soundscape with HDR on or off, for each audio device, you can choose to bypass HDR. For example, if we launch a random missile, and then bypass HDR, you can hear that the wildlife is no longer being ducked. You can also enable or disable culling. So if we turn on the HDR culling debug, we can see in the envelope window that is tracking the max momentary loudness at that culling threshold offset. We'll solo the wildlife loudness definition within the HDR mixer so you can hear it during the weapon fire with culling enabled. So during the weapon fire, you can see in the on-screen messages the sounds that are being culled. Since they're below that red culling threshold, they'll be stopped before they actually start playing.